Thank you very much, all of you, for giving us your time today. Thank you very much to the Mandys. It's been coming here to this farm for 3 years now, and it's been a remarkable experience. My first arrival was in the middle of a very dusty August day, and we've been driving around farms all day, and we arrived here, and there was no dust, and the fields were green, and we hadn't seen anything green all day, and it was quite a remarkable experience. And it's been wonderful working with the Mandys on this. Regenerative agriculture, one of the criticisms against regenerative agriculture is that it doesn't have a definition. I don't think that's a problem. I think that's a good thing, because everything that's come before here in the natural farming world has been so focused on definitions and things that they exclude most of the people. And we want to include as many people as we can in this. And I think Joap's address this morning really tied into this. Like, what is regenerative agriculture? It's life. It's bringing life onto farms, and you're going to see a lot of life on this farm today. You can hear the chickens out there as we sit here going through all of this. And so, underpinning that, if you want something of a definition, they're the 5 soil health principles. They're not regenerative agriculture's principles, they are general soil health principles. And we want to try to plan our management around those. So we want to create life by using the 5 soil health principles. There's another thing that I learned the other day, and that is when working with natural farming systems, we want to be strategic, pragmatic, and incremental. Not too much Kool-Aid, not too much jumping in the deep end, not too much changing the whole farm at once. And I'd like to commend the Mandys for what they've done over the last 6 years in being very strategic, pragmatic, and incremental. We focus primarily on family farms, and there are a lot of threats to family farms, especially beef farms. The Competition Commission did an investigation into the concentration of power in the beef industry, and they said 56% of beef producers closed their shop in the last decade. So that's a real threat. Some of these threats are inside our circle of influence, others of them are outside. So the circle of influence and concern, those are some of the things that farmers worry about. And what we do is we spend too much time worrying about the rain, the price, the government, and a whole bunch of stuff that actually we can't do anything about. It's beyond our control. And all we do when we worry about that is we disempower ourselves. We want to focus on the circle of influence, the stuff that we can actually fix. We want to fix our soil health and make it better so we spend less money at the car. We also want to keep really good results and understand our farms so that we can manage by measuring. And that's the circle of influence where we want to wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning thinking about something. We don't want to do that, but if we do, we want it to be inside that green circle, not inside the red circle. So there are 2 things that are both inside and outside that circle that affect us, and those are bankruptcy and desertification. And as you'll see now, they are intertwined, and we can definitely make a difference in terms of those things on our own farms. Bankruptcy we all know about. Desertification, we know less about that. It's not just a threat to us farmers, it's an existential threat to all of us. But it also can be part of our bankruptcy in a farming scenario. So we all know the 3-legged pot and what happens if the one leg breaks. If we look at the bigger environmental threat that we face as a species, we all know about climate change and we all know about biodiversity that make the newspaper every week. But very little ever makes the news on desertification. We actually have to manage all 3 because it's a 3-legged pot. And we find out as we get into them and study them more that they're all 3 connected with each other. Now the UN says that desertification is land degradation in typically dry areas resulting from various factors including climatic variation and human activities. This dry area view of desertification I think is very limited. That's the tip of the iceberg. I think there's desertification on almost every single farmed field, whether that's livestock or cropping in the world. And if you think about a soil that through our process of farming with it, we have reduced its ability to infiltrate and hold water, That soil can't do what it used to be able to do in terms of photosynthesis and contribution to its ecosystem, and it is therefore desertified. So these are some photographs Michael sent me. The 2 fields in August in this farming district. I can tell you Michael's is the nice one. So this is not a dry area, we're not in the Karoo. So that's not being caused by there not being enough rain. This is a good season. It's not being caused by climate change, because if it was, it would be the other field would be in the same condition. At the heart of this is desertification. By changing our grazing on our farm, we can decrease desertification on our own farms. We can worry about that, focus on it, and it works for us. There was an amazing research project called the Carbon Cowboys research done in the United States over the last 10 years. They compared 5 neighboring farms, one with regenerative grazing, high density grazing, the other one with conventional grazing and fertilizer use. And these are the results on water infiltration. The regenerative farm was able to take in 3.5 inches of water in a rain event. The neighboring conventional farm, only 1.5 inches of water. That's 57% less. And that for me is desertification. And that puts a whole handbrake on the whole system that soil is involved with. Okay, so we can change this by dealing with grazing and fixing desertification, and we can also change our stocking rates. Now this flies in the face of conventional wisdom about grazing and grasslands, and how if we double our stocking rates, we're going to destroy our grassland ecosystem. But as we'll go through this, we'll see there's a different way of doing this. And really what it comes down to is biomass. If you double your biomass production of your farm, you can double your stocking rate without undermining that farm. This is an interesting study that was done by Professor Richard Teague from Texas A&M. He put collars on cattle that were in a field for a year, continuous grazing system, and they recorded the GPS movements of every single cow in that field. The cows only used 39% of the land. 61% of the land they never visited. They spent nearly 10% of their time on 40% of the land. They reduced the stocking rate from an effective 8.5 hectares per LSU down to 3.6 hectares per LSU. It's a recipe for land degradation, and it's a recipe for bankruptcy. So I want to just walk through a few high-density grazing practices that result in us being able to increase our stocking rates and to make these changes by increasing our biomass. So the first one is water distribution. Study in Australia reckoned between 20 and 25% increase in access to grass by having even water distribution across your veld. So I just imagine putting those white dots are water points that we added to that farm. Those little green dots can now go all over the place there. I'm easily giving myself an extra 20% biomass for that, okay? So the next thing is herd impact. What is herd impact? Herd impact is grazing, it's trampling, it's cutting, the hooves cutting the soil, breaking cap soil, creating roots in for water. It's saliva, it's urine, it's dung, and all of these things come together to stimulate growth in grass and to increase our biomass production. Now, as you saw from that study that Richard Teague did, these things are very poorly distributed across conventional grazing farms. They're all at the water trough, they're at the lick, they're at the gate, and they're at that high point where the cows like to hang out. With high density grazing, you can create a much more even distribution of these very important ecological impacts across your veld. And so for that, I'm going to give myself another 30% biomass, and I'm now sitting on a 50% increase. Rest and recovery is crucial. Our grasses suffer from being grazed too quickly. If you look at this picture here, it's 3 different bunches of grass. The one closest to me was cut to 2 inches every 2 weeks. Every week. The middle one to 2 inches every 2 weeks, and the last one to 2 inches every 4 weeks. And you can see the massive impact on the roots of those plants by having rest. And so when you have animals in a camp for a month, you're looking at the grass closest to me. And ultimately, that is a palatable grass species that's going to die. It's going to disappear, and your farm is going to become increaser species. This concept of rest is something you've got to get your head around. It's very variable. In the middle of summer, when you've had good rain, in an area like this, you could be coming back every 21 days because the grass is getting to phase 3 growth by 21 days. If you're in the Karoo, you're talking 400, 450 days on that nice sweet belt they have down there before the animals are coming back to that grass. And I'm going to give myself another 30% for that, so I'm now sitting on 80% increase in biomass. Reduced chemicals. This is a very infrequently spoken about aspect of high density grazing. When we lived in Europe in the Middle Ages, we had dreadful plagues the whole time because we lived with our dung. And then we invented waterborne solution, and our dung went away from us, and we stopped having plagues. So when we have cattle in a camp for a month, and every day, a couple of times a day, they go to the water trough, and then they lie down, and then when they stand up, you know that's exactly when they like to poo the most. All of that is there. In a high-density grazing system, every day you move away from your dung. And when the parasites 21 or 31 or whatever days later emerge from that dung, there are no livestock there for them to hang on to, and your parasite problem on your farm starts to wind down. You don't need to use as much medication then. There are farmers who've dropped all dewormers and porons, and their dung beetle populations have exploded. And with that, their microbiology that we can't see has exploded. And that microbiology comes from in the soil up into the moist dung because it can actually live there even though it's out of the soil. And it can get inside there and take things it needs back down into the soil. And I'm going to be schnoop there, and I'm only going to give myself another 20% biomass for that, and I'm now on 100% increased biomass. Then water infiltration. All of these wonderful things result in the water infiltration increasing. More water can go, and you can go now back to 2 times or 3 times where you were before you began, and that makes the whole system function a whole lot better. And then when we have a late starting spring, or we have the most now common thing in the Free State, the midsummer drought, or we have a real drought, then all of these things are important in terms of the resilience of your veld and giving you grass growth. And for that, I'm going to give myself another 20%. So now we've got an ecosystem that is functioning again. Everything is connected and everything is working and living. The insect population has exploded, the bird life has exploded, and things are going really well. And we're now on 140% of the biomass. And so that is how the practices of high density grazing work together to enable your farm to heal itself, to heal the soil, most importantly, heal the plant-soil relationship, and to be able to stock more animals. And we will get to how important that is. That's all a bit theory. Let's go real fact. A lot of faces here from rates. Just last week, we were on Donnie Stubbett's farm. We had an amazing walk with an environmentalist, a game ranger, through the veld there, and he was identifying stuff. It was really a great experience. But there's a real scientific study being done there for the last 5 years by Fritz van Oudshoorn. And these are the results that he's got from that study over the last 5 years. That there's been a 50% increase in palatable grass species. Species that were not there are now back. Those seeds have been sleeping in the soil, waiting for the soil health to recover so that they can come back. Interestingly, most of them are temperate. They're on the edges. They grow in the spring and in the autumn, and so they can extend your growing season. Remarkably, there's been an 80% increase in indigenous legumes in that veld. Now, probably most of us farming 20 years ago never dreamt that there were indigenous legumes in South African veld that would be improving that whole ecosystem function and playing that great nitrogen capture. Overall, there's been a 60% increase in plant biodiversity in that study, and there's been a 100% increase in water infiltration. So that's 8 years of high density, but 5 years of that has been inside this study. So remarkable changes right down the road here in rates. So now let's get to the money side of this. Beefonomics. South African beefonomics is not good. As I said earlier, 56% of businesses have closed in the last decade. If you take the country average, the return on investment is 3.5%. Okay? That's not a very healthy return on investment. Inflation is 6%. But if we take our beef inputs out of the general inflation basket and study them, we get 11% inflation. So you're getting 3.5% return in an 11% inflationary environment. If you want to borrow some money to do something from the bank, the best rate you're going to get is 14%. Effectively, if you study this, you realize that big agriculture is mining all of our balance sheets. Because that 3.5%, or even if it's 5%, is making our balance sheet smaller each year by year by year. And they're making their money out of feed, they're making their money out of tractors, they're making their money out of all of these things, but it's coming out of our balance sheet, not out of our income. So the current solution at the moment is buy your neighbor. I don't think I've ever been to a farm where the farmer doesn't have a little secret plan in the corner of his mind. Sometimes he doesn't want to talk about it, other times he's very upfront about it, about how he wants to buy the neighbor, okay? But buying neighbors is very expensive, because what has happened is that our land price has lost its correlation to how much money you can make out of land with cattle. All over the industrial world of agriculture, land has taken on a scarcity value, and it has become valued at more than the money you can make out of it. So it's very expensive to buy your neighbor's land, especially if he thinks his house is amazing and his workshops are amazing and all the other improvements he's made are amazing. But you don't have to do that. You can do vertical farming. You can expand vertically rather than horizontally. And you can do that by changing your system, investing in water reticulation and fencing and management to double your stocking rate, and thereby, without buying a farm, effectively get a farm. I've done some studies on this. It's about 10-15% the value of buying a new farm to make the infrastructure changes you need on your farm to get a new farm. Now that 10% is looking a whole lot better as a startup cost. We're now going to go into some real economics. As Francis said earlier, we started a regenerative beef study club because we want to try to create norms for farmers that farmers can work with. These figures up here, probably a bit small for the people at the back, but they cost per kg of meat produced figures. Okay, so we're reducing everything to kgs and profit per hectare in our thinking. And they're from the same farm, these figures. The top part is diesel, labor, and a total for that. And in the conventional system, that comes to R9.91. In the regenerative system, with double the stocking rate, it comes to R8.60. Now you must wonder, why is the per kg price lower under the regenerative system? Because you are producing so many more kilograms of meat, but your costs haven't all gone up. Okay? Now most farmers, when they're sitting up doing the back of the matchbox thing, they don't include land, price of land. Either they inherited the land, or they're paying the bank back for the land, but we're not including it in our cash flows. But that's a bit unrealistic, and that kind of thinking makes us end up with getting 3.5% return on investments. And so this farmer has included his land. The going rate in this area for renting land is 400 Rand a hectare. Okay? And so that, for his costs, adding that in, the conventional total is 19 Rand and 72 cents per kilogram of meat. For the double stocking regenerative, it's 13 Rand and 51 cents, which is 31% less per kilogram. So now that thing that keeps us all up at night that we have no control over, the wiener price, comes into the equation, and I've put in 33 bucks there. And that gives us a gross margin for conventional of 13.28 and 19.49, that same ratio of 31% better. Now I've taken that farmer's figures and I've added a few bits and pieces to them just to make it interesting for this. So this is now not the realm of reality. There are two farms. The one is conventional and it has 200 cows, 200 breeding cows, and the other one is regenerative and has 400 cows. The conception rate on the conventional is 80. On the regenerative, I've dropped it to 70%. The weaners, the conventional guy gets 160 weaners, that is 80%. The regenerative guy gets 280, it is 70%. The weight, I've dropped the regenerative one by 20 kilograms, just so no one argues with me about that. But then look at the gross margin. 135% difference in gross margin. So what did we always do? We like to compare everything per animal. So let's do a gross margin per animal. It's 17% difference. But if we go to the gross margin per hectare, and what is our single biggest cost, our single biggest input cost? Land. Gross margin per hectare, we're back at the 135% more. Farmer number one, he averages 11 kilograms of meat per hectare, per 100 millimeters of rain. Farmer number two, which is this farm here, they are on 6.5 kilograms per hectare. And if you go down to your good South African average producer, they're at 3.5 kilograms. Okay, so that just gives you an idea of the massive variation. So if you look down at the bottom there, there's a very big gap between those two circles in the profits. When we started doing this study, and we took over some farmers that had done an independent study 15 years ago on this, when they first started doubling their stocking rates, what they all discovered was that when they worked things out on a per hectare basis, they were not making more money in profit than the cost of a hectare in their area. So all the land they were renting in their area, they were losing money. And so if you look at this case here, for a conventional South African good farmer, at that 400 Rand a hectare for that part of the Free State, it's 80 Rand it translates to when you take the rain effect out. And so that's where they are. They're making 50 Rand a hectare, but they're paying 80 Rand a hectare to rent the neighbor's property. And this just gives a very good insight into why it is so important to record, to measure, and then to work with those figures. So, yeah, I just had 20 minutes. I've probably gone over it today already. The things I wanted to get people to think about is how we can have agency to improve our soil-plant relationships on our own farms. And secondly, how that agency can relate into the kind of economics which can get us into the future and the next generation. Thank you very much.